How many know about the Rohingya crisis? How many have heard of 1 million people being displaced? Over 10,000 being slaughtered. More than 10,000 babies born as a result of rape. That's what I'm going to talk about, but if that's all I talked about, we all would leave here crying today, especially me. What I came to do is show that second line there about some hope at last. There are some incredible stories of not only survival, but of people flourishing and learning and growing and offering their skills to help other people who really need their help. The crisis began last August, and we'll talk about that. Bangladesh is in what's called South Asia. Usually the only time we ever hear about Bangladesh is when there's a horrible catastrophe affecting thousands of people, whether it be a monsoon or a cyclone or a chemical spill or something. It is one of the most disadvantaged places geographically, politically, any way you want to put it. Bangladesh will rank in the bottom 10 countries in the world, whether it's in poverty, whether it's in tuberculosis, whether it's in density. They're number one. It's a very sad little country. It's about half the size of Oregon, if that gives you some perspective. It's got that big neighbor India to the west, and actually to the north, and actually to the west of it there. That's all India. The country we're going to talk about, the yin and yang here, the Bangladesh are the good people taking care of 1 million people they really didn't have room for, and the bad people are the Burmese, or also called Myanmar. And that's what started the whole crisis. And you can ask questions, but I am going to, hopefully, if I get through this, and I think I will have time, to leave questions for expansion. But if there's any clarification or anything I say that doesn't make sense, that's by all means ask it. Bangladesh is crisscrossed by multiple rivers, and they have about 5 months of heavy rains called the monsoons from May to October. And that's usually where you hear about literally millions of people being displaced. It's a delta, and it was carved out after World War II by the colonial powers like Great Britain. And they gave the worst land to this new country, which was called East Pakistan after World War II. Now, West Pakistan, real Pakistan, is on the other side of India. They're arch enemies. So to have Pakistan broken in two didn't work very well. And the big Pakistan really didn't want East Pakistan anyway. And so there was a civil war. It was a brief one, but it was a bloody one in 1971. And Bangladesh was started and founded in 1971. They are, as I said, one of the poorest countries on earth. And they are the most densely populated. So, Oregon, big Oregon, has 4 million people. Bangladesh is half of Oregon. Anybody want to guess how many people in Bangladesh? If we have 2 million people in that half of Oregon, what's Bangladesh have? 170 million. Okay? It is so populous that there is no room. And where these refugees were driven out of Myanmar into Bangladesh was once upon a time a forest and then an elephant preserve, and now it's totally denuded with people literally living and squatting in the dirt. This is what happened on August 25th, 2017. It is their December 7th, 1941 to them. This is a day of infamy in South Asia that will never be forgotten, and I happened to be there on the 1-year anniversary. I also was there 5 weeks after this began last October. These are just some of the headlines that hit almost all the major international news agencies such as Reuters, AP, BBC, Al Jazeera, but not the Grants Pass Courier. Not the Oregonian, not even the New York Times. It was buried on 13C. But it really has now turned out to be the largest migration, genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever sterile word you want to use for discrimination on a biblical scale against an ethnic minority. Their murder, their destruction and the forced migration. It is the largest since Rwanda of 1994, if that puts it into any perspective. Also, the crimes against the Muslims are ranked right up there with those of the fall of Yugoslavia and the Sarajevo, Bosnia atrocities for which people were ultimately punished. So this is a biggie. This is the biggie of the 21st century, and it's far from over. But it started a year ago when the Myanmar Buddhist, yes, Buddhist military government enacted a program of extermination of the Rohingya Muslim indigenous people of southwestern Myanmar who have lived there for centuries. Most of Burma are Buddhists, more than 95%. And the population at large, the populace at large, plus the military government, are fiercely anti-Muslim. And they used a raid, a violent raid by a few extremist Rohingya to unleash a program that had already been planned. They were just waiting for the match to be lit to begin a process of mass extermination. And they would landed by helicopter gunship as well as assault troops to attack this pastoral, illiterate group of Muslims, about 1.2 million, who had lived there for a long time, deprived of citizenship, deprived of voting rights, deprived of education, health care. They wouldn't even teach them the Burmese language in their schools because they said these are not our people, even though they've been in this area far longer than a lot of the Burmese have. People always say, you must be wrong. Buddhists don't do that. And that's like any religion, though. There are different sects. There are different. The Dalai Lama doesn't do that. He's appalled by this. There are many different types of Buddhism. This is a nationalist Buddhism. Please keep church and state apart, because when they aren't apart, this is what happens. The Buddhists are fiercely anti-Muslim there. They're worried about insurrection and rebellion and terrorism, all the things we hear about as well. But this is what happened when they're in charge of the army. And the Myanmar government is led by a military group, a committee. So this is what happened a year ago, and it resulted in the mass migration across mountains. It took days and for some people weeks to reach the safety of a Muslim country, which is what Bangladesh is. So they share that, and that's about all that they shared. Their language was different to some extent. They could communicate a little bit, but they had never lived in Bangladesh. They didn't know anybody in Bangladesh, but it was the only safe place they could go to. Most of the Rakhine district is the district they live in, and their choices for survival were either to hike to a river on the border down here and try to get across a river, or go out to sea and sail around the Bay of Bengal until they could get back. That was a very treacherous path, and many died along the way. That we went down to the border area, and literally there were bodies washing up on the beach. This is last October, when there was some semblance of a line there of new refugees coming into Bangladesh to be registered. But there was no camp. There was no place really where they could set up shop. So they literally camped in the dirt and in the mud. This was at the end of the monsoon season. And this grew to be the Kutupalong refugee camp outside of the closest city, which is Cox's Bazar, and that's where the NGO workers, myself and my cohorts and Kelly and the rest of us and all the Doctors Without Borders doctors and everybody else in the humanitarian world were living in Cox's Bazar, and we would be taken by transport of various types, not very good, about 2 hours to get into the camp. We were not permitted to stay in the camp or stay there at night, but we were there every day. And I was there in October. I went back in March and April, and I just got back having been there in August and September. But that's what a refugee camp looks like. Now this is 1 million people. They are in an area, again, this is a mind blower. They are in an area smaller than downtown Grants Pass. 3 miles by 3 miles. That'll wake me up. Okay, that's a little bit better for the pictures, I hope. If you went from Caveman Bridge up 7th Street to I-5, came down I-5 to the earlier exit, 53, 55, I guess, and came back down the Parkway to the river, that rough rectangle, that is about 3 miles in each direction. 1 million people. The entire population of Portland, Salem, and Eugene, that's 950,000. I checked it on Wikipedia. They can't be wrong. Okay? So more than those 3 cities living in Grants Pass. That's what a refugee camp looks like. And if I had a camera on my head and turned around, a 360-degree view of that.
What's their elevation there?
About 5 feet above sea level. That was what the big worry was. Being facetious, some of the hills do go up to 20 feet, but between 5 feet and 20 feet is for real. And the ocean, just to the west of the camp, they have big sandbags along there because you're driving and you're looking at the ocean, and it's different than going out to our coast. The ocean is at about eye level, and there are big sandbags because it floods every year for 5 months. It was just astounding to see. This is the country they're talking about when they say that climate change will swallow Bangladesh, and it will. It's already beginning to drown. So it's a very real phenomenon, particularly for these poor people that live on the margins of society anyway. But the degree of suffering and atrocity that they faced was pretty horrific. People sometimes ask, what's the worst thing you've ever seen in Bangladesh? And I tell them this picture. This is a 12-year-old girl in a safe house in Bangladesh who drew a cartoon crayon picture of the night the gunships arrived and her village was burned to the ground and all the people were killed. This is a blow-up of what she drew, with the napalm being dropped from above, soldiers on the ground cutting people into pieces and burning people. And if they ran out of the burning houses, they were shot. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. And what's happened is a year later, as in just last month, the United Nations, after an extensive review of data, found that the Rohingya had been the victims of genocide and ethnic cleansing. Those are magic words in the humanitarian and diplomatic world. They're supposed to trigger action, sanctions, even military involvement. None of that has happened as of yet. Myanmar still denies that this happened. They say that the villagers set fires to their own villages and that they've left voluntarily. That doesn't account for the more than 10,000 bodies that have been recovered so far. Okay. So this is what the camp looked like when I arrived last year. This is what the camp looked like in March and April. Big difference being dust, because it's now the dry season, not the wet season. And this is what the camp looked like about a month ago. And again, you could turn 360 degrees and see all of that. And not only that, they did face the monsoons. Thank God, literally, thank God the monsoons were not as horrible as they were anticipated. Myanmar got crushed by monsoons and displaced over 500,000 people. India had severe displacement and death. And Bangladesh in between actually finally came out ahead.
Where did they get the materials to build these shelters?
The United Nations for the most part, as well as private enterprise from Cox's Bazar as well. But most of the supplies came through the United Nations. This is what a monsoon looks like. That rickety bridge actually stayed up the whole time I was there. Not only, I was struck by the introduction today of what you were talking about. Today is World Polio Day. We've probably not seen polio in our lifetime. Polio is still possible in North Africa and in Asia. Kelly is a nurse. When she was there in January, the biggest diphtheria outbreak in the world in the last 10 years occurred, diphtheria. It's part of the DPT shots everybody got as children. The Rohingya were not permitted to get vaccination, so they all poured in, lived in this tight community of 1 million people in the size of Grants Pass without any prior health care, without immunization, and there were dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of deaths from diphtheria in young children, choking to death. So please honor Polio Day, and please educate those that do not immunize their children. Sexual violence is a huge problem there, and unfortunately continues and has now led to sex trafficking in the camp as well. So the people that live there still face enormous challenges. I'm going to go quickly through this because it's not that important other than to set the context, but I was the first doctor that Medical Teams International sent in last October with 3 nurses, and later we were joined by other staff, but that was our initial team, and we were told that they needed an inpatient diarrhea unit set up, they needed a mobile clinic to be set up to provide primary care, and they needed us to start a community health worker program to build trust and communication with the refugees. Last October, the monsoons were bad, and standing water or running water everywhere, open sewage. You can see why this would be a fertile ground for diarrheal diseases, and we were just frightened every day that the next case would be cholera, which is diarrhea on steroids. I mean, it is life-threatening. It can kill of dehydration in less than 24 hours because you are vomiting as well as having diarrhea. You cannot keep fluids in you. We did not see cholera, but we treated many, many people with severe diarrhea to the point of life-threatening dehydration. That should say an inpatient diarrhea unit we had running within a week to provide hydration. One of the top 3 causes of death worldwide in kids under 3 years old. We went through gallons and buckets of intravenous fluids. This was a little team that worked out of that crude bamboo shelter. The pediatrician is the lady in the middle there. See if this will work today. Yeah, that's Prudy, pediatrician, translator, American nurses, and 2 African nurses as well. Okay, the good part. Meet Jaber. Jaber is Rohingya. He came to us the first week we were there, well, literally we were building the clinic, and he said, "How can I help you?" We were surprised because he spoke English. We had not met anyone who spoke English. He had gone to 1 year of post-high school college level, more like a junior college, before they closed down those colleges and told him a couple of years ago that they were going to offer no further higher education. He was a godsend because he not only spoke English, he cared about his people, and he liked what we were doing. He recognized that we were there to help his countrymen. He had to flee from Myanmar with his family, just like the others had. And it brought to mind a famous refugee poem by a woman from Somalia who lives in England now. And it's called Home, is the name of the poem, Home. And I urge you to read it if you care to. But basically it says, no one leaves their home unless home is the mouth of the shark. He came through it okay. His family survived. His brother came over later. And he has made it his passion to help his own people. He became a translator at the reception intake area. And like I said, his English got better and better. And now he speaks fluent English because I've gotten to see him over the last year grow into a position of responsibility and trust. Plus, he tells his countrymen, you can trust these people. These are people that literally never had health care. They didn't know if we were there to hurt them. They had never seen shots or immunizations. They didn't know what we could do for them. They're learning. He also started teaching the doctors. We started hiring Bangladesh doctors this spring, right after Kelly left, and this Dr. Saif, and we now have 20 Bangladesh doctors providing the bulk of the care as our camp has expanded and the resources have expanded. And Jubair is right there to teach them how to really understand and interpret for the Rohingya. Because even though the languages, Bengali and Rohingya, are somewhat similar, there's a lot of differences. And until we got Rohingya translators, we didn't know what we didn't know. He also was responsible for all our referrals. I would see somebody critically ill with septic shock and give them the fluids and the antibiotics that I could, but they needed to be in a hospital. The nearest hospital was a 3-mile-long walk away in the spring and in the winter when Kelly was there in January as well. And they came up with all kinds of creative ambulances. That's the folded up tarp for the UNHCR. There's a real stretcher. That was just taken a couple months ago. And there's another one walking across this footbridge. But Jubair would get on the phone and contact a hospital. There were these field hospitals, MSF, which is Doctor Without Borders, have them, Malaysian Field Hospital, Turkish Field Hospital, UNICEF, other NGOs had hospitals. But getting people there was difficult. And Jubair not only would get them there, he sometimes would spend the night with the patients in the hospital. This was our little team that had grown quite a bit by April. And we now had, there's Jubair, and we now had many Bangladeshi doctors, many Bangladesh nurses, and there are 2 Bangladesh women physicians as well. Absolutely instrumental. So the team and the mission of MTI was growing. It really became necessary this spring, and particularly when I was there this summer, to work on tuberculosis, a huge problem. Bangladesh ranks number 6 in the world in tuberculosis. So you bring 1 million people in, have them live in squalor, close to one another, disease-ridden, malnourished. Guess what they get? Tuberculosis. This is a poor refugee with widespread tuberculosis, 55 years old. She weighed 60 pounds, and she died 2 days later. He also was training, when I left, he was training other Rohingya to speak English and to translate for us. And we now have 8 Rohingya translators. Absolutely priceless. So I give Jubair all the credit in the world. Kelly knows him from her time there. Everybody that's ever met him has agreed that he's clearly our MVP for Rohingya refugees. This is his life work now. Our roles changed. As I said, we were originally providing direct patient care in October, but by March, we were teaching the Bangladesh doctors how to take care of the refugees, how to recognize diphtheria, tuberculosis, malaria, typhoid fever. Although most of the things we treat are very mundane, low back pain and nausea and worry, stress, as you can imagine, depression, as you can imagine, the tropical diseases are also rampant. So that was me a year ago, and that was me 6 months ago, working with DJ and some of the other doctors. That's the model that MTI uses, but whether it be in Uganda or in Bangladesh, train the host country medical staff to take care of the refugees. So rather than going in, swooping in, providing a week of care and leaving, we are teaching now. And they seem to like that. They're very appreciative. They've never had one-on-one bedside teaching before. And that little tiny pup tent lean-to is now this. And it is a full functional medical center, as much as an outpatient clinic can be without electricity, where we see about 200 patients a day. Children predominantly, women number 2, men a distant third, because most of the refugees are women and children. But they now are offering antenatal care. They're going to start doing 24/7 inpatient care and deliveries there as well. But to have been there when we struck that little tent way back here, it no longer exists, obviously. That grew into a big tent, and now it's grown into this. And now MTI has 3 of these spread through the camp, seeing several hundred patients a day, plus 2 additional smaller health centers. So it's a huge presence. We have now more than 25 Bangladesh doctors, more than 45 Bangladesh nurses providing the care, with teams like Kelly worked with and I worked with coming in, usually 3 to 5 doctors, 3 to 5 nurses working with the Bangladesh people. The other person I want to introduce to you, for those who don't know, Mona Lisa. That is her name, Mona Lisa Yasrat. She is Bangladeshi. She also walks on water as far as I'm concerned. Her smile just lights up a room. Great sense of humor. She was a college student a year ago, sophomore, not really very focused. I mean, she was 19. How focused are most 19-year-olds? She heard about this terrible tragedy. She lives in Cox's Bazar. She heard about 1 million people, and she said, I was curious who these people were coming here. So she dropped out of school for a while and became a translator because she speaks beautiful English. And there she is translating for an Italian field officer that worked with us. And that was on day one. I met her on my first day there last October. She was indispensable to me because we were doing the primary care. We were providing the care, and I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have explained that I wanted to look in this child's ear. I couldn't get the trust of this mother to let me examine this baby without help. She became also a favorite of the volunteer expat doctors and nurses. That's Becca from Tacoma. And I asked Kelly today, I said, do you know Mona Lisa? She says, oh, yes. Everybody knows Mona Lisa who works for MTI, even though she has not worked for them since December. This was our little tent group back in October a year ago that grew into that large health center. Mona Lisa, Sweetie, Taslim were my first 3 translators there. I've managed to see them each time I go back. None of them work for MTI any longer because they've moved on to bigger and better things, particularly Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa immediately was recognized as being exceptional, and by that I mean she didn't just translate the words, she really understood what she was doing, and her curiosity drove her. And then she became so compassionate and understanding of what they were going through. And now she has a commitment to make this her life work as well. One thing she did was started working for the International Criminal Court, helping this pro bono law firm document the atrocities against the Rohingya, which was used by the United Nations last month to encourage sanctions on the basis of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Those are some of the quotes that are in this report. It was over 100 individual case studies of when, where, how, who was there, what date, where are the bodies, what did they do, who were the officers. All of that was recorded. But the quotes speak more than pictures. The girls were screaming so loud like their souls were leaving their bodies. She also, so I had dinner with her in April, and I had dinner with her twice this last time. I said, what else have you been doing? She said, well, I'm interpreting for UNICEF, getting the children's stories. I'm still doing some interpreting for international news agencies. And she finally said, do you know who Nicholas Kristof is? Anybody here recognize that name? New York Times editorial board. One of the most impassioned supporters, defenders of the oppressed in the developing world that America has to offer. 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. He was picked. He picked Mona Lisa to be his translator after he was refused entry into the areas where the villages were burned down in Myanmar. He came into Bangladesh, said, I have to talk to some refugees. I have to know what happened. And he worked with her in December and in January. And I asked Mona Lisa what her proudest moment was. She said the day she saw this story published and heard about it in the New York Times, December 15th, where Nicholas described a 10-year-old Rohingya girl who had endured the murder of her family. And Nicholas asked, well, if she had actually witnessed the killings herself. She said, oh, yes, I lost my father. He meant everything to me. We were such a great team. And I lost my 4-year-old brother, too. And as Mr. Kristof writes, as I looked over at the girl, her tears were running down her cheeks. And I looked at my translator, Mona Lisa, and she was wiping away tears as well. And I realized finally that I was too. He wrote a wonderful book. If anybody wants to take anything from this talk, Half the Sky was published probably 10 or 15 years ago about oppressed women in the third world, like Mona Lisa. She lost her father 4 years ago. She comes from a poor family, but she's devoting her life to the refugees. And she went from being, again, you can't read that, but it does say that she went from being a college student to a social activist for the Rohingya in less than a year. Well, what does the future hold for her? She has countless opportunities to do interpreting. She's well known in the international journalism world now. But her goal is to complete her undergraduate degree. She's got 18 months to go. She then hopes to continue to work on refugee issues and do translation. She's going to go to graduate school, probably even law school. Someday she wants to become a judge. And her subject will be international criminal justice. So, is there hope for the children? Are things getting any better at all? And the answer is yes, slowly they are. They do have better health care. They are immunized. They are dying at less of malnutrition. And so there is some hope. They have paved roads now, paved meaning with bricks. They have better sewage, better infrastructure for hygiene. They laugh, they smile like our kids. They play with tin cans or whatever they find and make toys out of them. There now are shopkeepers along the streets because the workers for the Rohingya that have helped do the UN improvements to the infrastructure are being paid. So there's a thriving middle-class merchant economy. The Japanese dropped this bridge in, which was previously an impassable ravine. Tree planting, because every tree had been burned. So that is the end of what I have to say. But as we finish, if there are any questions, and if I know you got to leave and it's past my time, I'm going to show you some pictures from both Kelly and my favorite photographer in all of Bangladesh, Nihab. He is an artist, and I really would like to turn off the lights because his pictures are museum quality. So I don't care if I have to stand in the dark. You got to see these pictures. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Buddhist military.
Yes.
It's like sweet and sour pork. It doesn't make any sense.
I know.
Can you unpack what the Myanmar believe, how that squares with basically a peaceful Buddhist?
We can talk about it later, but you got to trust me on this. There are many instances over the centuries in South Asia of the Buddhists influencing governments and being very nationalistic. This all has to do with us versus the world. This all has to do with they are lesser people than we are. So it sounds incredible. I have many Buddhist friends. They have researched it as well. I can give you the references. I can give you the books that show that occasionally even Buddhists can cross to the dark side. The Dalai Lama, as I said, and most Buddhists in the world outside of Myanmar are kind and peaceful, loving friends that we know as true Buddhism. This is a nationalistic interpretation or bastardization of their religion, unfortunately. Okay, Nihab. Any other question? Any other question? He loves children and he loves the rain. So a lot of these pictures you'll see are taken in the rain of children. Like that one. I mean, come on. Anyway, he's now MTI's official photographer and photojournalist for the entire program in Bangladesh. We now have over 200 employees that are Bangladeshi. And like I said, we'll continue to send volunteers to work there as well. Rain and kids, his favorite subjects. Yes?
Isn't there some movement for the Rohingya to re-interview?
Thank you. Yes, there is. He's talking about, is there an effort to repatriate the refugees back to Myanmar? Myanmar still does not say this tragedy exists. They say if it does exist, it's self-inflicted, and no, we will never grant them citizenship, health care, education, voting rights, but yes, they may return and live inside these wired compounds with barbed wire around the top. They look like Auschwitz in 1945. They may return under those circumstances. So the United Nations is bargaining with Myanmar. The United Nations is bargaining with the Bangladesh government to help this happen. Guess who they're not talking to? The refugees. They're not stupid. They're not going to go back until there's safety guaranteed. More children, more rain. On the beach. More children, less rain. Sunny day. My favorite picture. He took me, I told Kelly, he took me on a tour across the camp. I wanted to see all of the 5 clinics that MTI was working at. I'd only worked at 2. And he said, okay, the next day it rains hard, we're going, because he liked to walk across the camp in the rain taking pictures. So I went with him, and I actually got a knee-hab picture out of it. But that was one of the most fun days ever. The kids were running around buck naked up and down the streets, just playing in the rain. It was about 80, 85 degrees, and raining like a banshee. And I was soaked like a wet rat by the time I got home. That's actually a Bruce Murray picture. That's Lee Olson, obstetrician from Ashland. She just got back, having been there 2 months, starting the OB program and the prenatal care program. Wonderful, wonderful person. And those are the daughters of the Bangladesh obstetrician she worked with. Thank you so much for caring.